Dr. Kraft received a PhD in clinical psychology in 1996. During her psychology internship at Drake Medical Center, she joined the Navy as both an in-flight specialist and clinical psychologist. In February 2004, when her twins were 15 months old, she was deployed in Iraq for 7 months with a Marine surgical unit. Her book, Rule Number 2, is about her experience in Iraq. Today, she is a consultant for the Navy and the Marines' PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder treatment programs. Please welcome Dr. Heidi Squier Kraft.
Well, good morning. So I have been doing a fair amount of speaking over the last few years, and I have to say that I'm quite certain this is my first talk in which the Vice President warmed up the audience for me. It may not be the last, but it is the first. And I wish he was here to hear me say that and then very respectfully say, "Thank you, sir, for such a good job." It's an honor to be with you here today. Before I begin, how many veterans of our country's militaries do we have in the audience today? Thank you all very much for your service. I was sharing with my terrific sponsors last night that doing this many speeches, it sort of becomes a little desensitized, but sometimes it still is emotional, and the reasons for that emotion sometimes are obvious, like Memorial Day. Other times it can be things that are upcoming that sort of take me by surprise. Baseball season just started. Did everyone know that? We got the skills players have arrived in spring training. We'll see whether that's a big deal in San Diego or not. But here we are, and baseball season's starting. And this makes me think of a young man, a very special person and one of our country's heroes. Close to 9 years ago now, he died, sacrificing his life for his fellow Marines. He was a young man that I had the privilege to know through only a few moments of holding his hand. They were moments that occurred in an austere field hospital out in the dirt of western Iraq. We didn't speak. He couldn't speak. So I didn't know him, I mean, not really. And yet, because I've now come to know his family, I've learned that he was much more than a Marine, much more than a hero. He was a beloved son and brother, and he was a baseball player. His wonderful experience at his high school included a batting average of .408, which is still a record. And he was drafted by the Arizona Diamondbacks, but chose the Marines instead. And as it often does, I'm finding that life comes full circle. Because it was 2 years ago now on Memorial Day that my then 8-year-old hit his first out-of-the-park home run. And instead of standing up like a good mother should and taking a picture of him as he was coming into home plate and all his little friends were jumping up and down waiting for him, I was texting Jason Dunham's mother to tell her. And you know what she wrote back? She said, "I would give anything to see Jason strike out one more time." Like I said, baseball season, who knew? So the bottom line is, I think, how do we go through these experiences and not be changed? We are changed. And those of you in the room who I asked to see your hands, those that you honor by being here today, your veterans of our past and present service, and their proud families, they're all changed. We, as patriots who support them and have supported them through what is now a long war, we're changed too. But ladies and gentlemen, I hope if there's one thing you take out of hearing me today, it's that the change is the whole point. The change is what we're afraid of, what we dread, and then what we cling to, what we depend on when everything else seems fleeting. The change is what matters, and the stories behind that change deserve to be told. So together, as a nation, we can celebrate them, cry for them, learn from them, and move on. I believe that's probably the reason I'm here with you today. There's almost always a reason. And I hope that after today, you, as members of this very proud, patriotic community, will think of your service members and their brave families and maybe look at them with slightly different eyes. And I hope that my words might encourage all of you to embrace your own stories through all of this, of patriotism, of pride in your community and its long history, and in one another. And most importantly, in the role we all play in this long road ahead for our veterans. It was February of 2004 that I deployed with a Marine Corps surgical company to Western Iraq. At the time, I was active duty in the Navy, and as was said, my babies were 15 months old. So, said goodbye to my family in Florida and headed out to Camp Pendleton, where a ragtag group of us, put our things together and headed out to Iraq. Our job there was to set up a mobile field hospital to care for the Marines operating in the area, and there were a lot of them. We had an air wing, an infantry regiment, and a huge combat support battalion. I was part of a 4-person combat stress platoon, myself, my psychiatrist partner, and 2 enlisted psychiatric technicians. Together, we were responsible for the mental health treatment and care of about 10,000 US Marines. This was a long time ago, 2004. Some of you will remember this year as the year in which both battles for Fallujah were fought. It was a difficult time for all of us. I can say for certain, on behalf of the medical personnel, we could never have imagined or dreamed of the number of casualties we would see during that time. Toward the end of this very challenging time, I decided I was going to write this list of things that were good and bad about Iraq. I think that for me, it was probably the beginning of what became a lot of writing as therapy and closure. For my colleagues out in Iraq, this was hysterically funny, because as I told them, I'm going to write a list, they said, that's going to be the most lopsided list anyone's ever written. It was lopsided, true, but it took the form of a poem, and I sent it via email to my husband, who forwarded it to about 25 people. By the time I returned to Florida in September, the list, as I had called it, had literally been forwarded around the world, and hundreds of emails were waiting for me. People that wanted to talk about it, that related to it. And I have to say, I was embarrassed, I was overwhelmed, I wasn't myself in 15 different ways, and I didn't handle all the attention very gracefully at first. Until I started hearing from Vietnam-era Marines, Korean War Navy corpsmen, nurses, Marines even from World War II, who told me that the list made them remember, and that remembering was okay. And then I was humbled. I thought I would share the poem, as it is truly the beginning of my story, and it appears many others as well. Things that were good. Sunset over the desert, almost always orange. Sunrise over the desert, almost always red. The childlike excitement of having fresh fruit at dinner after going months without it. Being allowed to be the kind of clinician I know I can be and want to be, with no limits placed and no doubts expressed. But most of all, the United States Marines, our patients, walking every day and having every single person who passed by me say, "Oorah, ma'am!" Having them tell me, one after another, through blinding pain or morphine-induced euphoria, when can I get out of here? I just want to get back to my unit. Meeting a young sergeant who had lost an eye in an explosion, he asked his surgeon if he could open the other one. When he did, he sat up and looked at the Marines from his team who were being treated in the other room. He smiled, laid back down, and said, "Well, I only have one good eye, Doc, but I can see that my Marines are okay." And of course, meeting the one I will now